Okay, I am standing here in the Dustman Orchard along the Chambersburg Pike, just near the headquarters of General Robert E. Lee. And today's video series is going to be entitled Longstreet's Countermarch. Now, one of the most, or should I say least understood aspects of the Battle of Gettysburg is the approach and the countermarch of General James Longstreet on July 2nd of 1863. This march would assure that General Robert E. Lee's plan of attack on the morning of July 2nd, 1863, between 10 and 11 a.m. would not happen. This would delay the attack of the second day's actions, which would result in the actions down at Devil's Den, the Wheat Field, the Rose Farm, and Little Round Top until nearly 4 p.m. Instead of General Lee's plan beginning at 10 a.m., it would not begin until 4 p.m. That delay in time, that 5 hours of delay in time, would be very costly for the Confederate Army. Now, the object of the countermarch was to move Hood and McLaws' divisions from their halt just north of the Fairfield Road to a position on Anderson's right. McLaws' division with Kershaw's brigade would be in the lead of the march. Making this more difficult was the change in the left flank of the Union Army due to Major General Dan Sickles' movement of his corps to a salient 1 mile to the north in a peach orchard. This video series, we will actually trace the route of Major General James Longstreet's countermarch of July 2nd, 1863. As we pass by the roads and the farms that Longstreet and his troops passed by on that afternoon, you'll see the length of the march and the costliness that it would have on the effect of the Confederate Army on July 2nd, 1863. This has been Longstreet's Countermarch Part 1 on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Longstreet's Countermarch. Now, General James Longstreet and Colonel Edward Alexander Porter rode to this point here along the Chambersburg Pike to meet General Robert Edward Lee. Now, Longstreet gave Lee the position of the Federal Army, and he stated to Longstreet that on that morning the left flank of that army would be attacked. Longstreet would then send Edward Alexander Porter out to get an idea of the ground, bring his battalion up, but he left the Washington artillery to the rear. He warned Porter not to be spotted by signalmen on Little Round Top. General Lee meets with Longstreet and Porter here. He discusses his battle plan of attack on July 2nd, 1863, around 10 a.m., and Longstreet, doubting that plan, would then begin a reconnaissance of the Union Army to find out their position. From this point, General Lee would give an order stating that when your army is in order, begin the attack. General Longstreet would misinterpret that order, and because of his doubt with the original plan, he would then start a countermarch of his army to get his troops in order. Therefore, his idea of when the attack would start and General Lee's would be different, and it would be very costly for the Confederate Army on July 2nd, 1863. This has been our next part in Longstreet's Countermarch on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Adam Butt Farmhouse on Hers Ridge Road. It's located at 1875 Hers Ridge Road here in Gettysburg. And this is the area right here where McLaws' division with Kershaw's brigade in the lead began Longstreet's countermarch on July 2nd, 1863. Now, Adam Butt was a local farmer. He lived in this house. The house was built in the year of 1802. He also had a schoolhouse on his farm property. At one time, the farm property stretched all the way over here where those woods are, and just over here in the distance is the Adam Butt schoolhouse. It's a one-room schoolhouse. So Butt's farm consisted of this entire area. Now, when McLaws' division with Kershaw's brigade began the march, the counter march, to get the troops into position, also adjusting on Sickles' movement on July 2nd, they headed in this direction here toward the Black Horse Tavern. They would cross the road, and we'll look at that in our next part. They'll cross the road right at the Black Horse Tavern and head at that time to what they thought would be the area around Little Round Top. This has been our next part in Longstreet's countermarch here at the Adam Butt Farm on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Bream's Black Horse Tavern on the Fairfield Road, and it was here, coming from the Adam Butt Farm in that distance toward our camera, that the men of Kershaw's division passed by and across the Fairfield Road on July 2nd of 1863. Again, earlier in the day, Porter had went out into this direction over here beyond this hill with his artillery to try to find out where the Union troops were on Little Round Top. Longstreet had sent him out in advance and then ordered a countermarch to get his army in order on July 2nd of 1863. They started off at the Adam Butt Farm in the distance, headed toward this direction, and they crossed the Fairfield Road right here today at the intersection of Fairfield Road and Black Horse Tavern Road. They would head to this direction. In our next part, we're going to talk about a problem that they encountered as they headed to the southern end of the Gettysburg battlefield. This has been our next part here on Longstreet's countermarch on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Longstreet's countermarch. And as we talked about McLaws' division with Kershaw's brigade in the lead, heading toward the southern end of the battlefield, they took this road here. Bream's Hill sits here along a crest ridge to our left, and also as we drive in the car, we will begin to head up Bream's Hill, which was later called the Troublesome Hill. Civil War veterans after the Battle of Gettysburg called the Confederate Civil War veterans rather called this the Troublesome Hill. And the reason for that is when they reached the Troublesome Hill, they were forced to halt. Right up here at the crest of this little height, they were forced to halt. The reason for that halt was they were then spotted by Union signalmen on Little Round Top when they reached this area right here. And we're going to stop and get out and take a look at this area in our next video. This has been Longstreet's countermarch on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Brigade reached this point on the Troublesome Hill. They were spotted by Union signalmen on Little Round Top in the distance. Of course, in 1863, this area had a lot less trees than it does today. And these signalmen were then being spotted heading directly toward the Union Army. And there was a problem. Now, one of the problems was that, as we talked about in one of our first parts, Longstreet had sent Porter out with his artillery, leaving the Washington artillery behind, into the same area earlier in the day. Now, previous to the Battle of Gettysburg, it had rained quite a bit. The troops here in McLaws and Kershaw's probably didn't notice, but they should have seen artillery tracks of Colonel Edward Porter Alexander, who took a route across a nearby farm in this direction, heading by the Plank Farm toward the southern end of the battlefield. They should have noticed these tracks in the dirt, which were probably closer to Willoughby Run and down on to the Pitzer Schoolhouse. But they didn't. And when they arrived here, a problem developed because now they are spotted by Union signalmen on the Round Tops over here. So at this point is where the countermarch really begins. Longstreet's troops are then forced to turn around, head back down this hill, back toward Bream's Tavern again, and find a different route. On our next several parts, we're actually going to drive in a car and trace the route of Longstreet's countermarch. And eventually that route will lead back up along the Willoughby Run just a few miles, or just maybe a mile and a half east of here, down to the Pitzer Schoolhouse area, and then on to the battlefield. This route of march would approximately take 4 hours, delaying General Lee's plan of July 2nd, 1863, from 10:30 in the morning till nearly 4 p.m. This has been our next part in our series, Longstreet's Countermarch, here on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Our next part, and we just turned around here on Troublesome Hill, and as we drive in a motor vehicle here, we're going to look at the route of Longstreet's countermarch, the confusion it created, why it took so long, and why the battle was delayed until 4 p.m. And do remember, as we take this route, we are in an automobile going about 25 or 30 miles an hour. In 1863, this would have been a dirt road. Would have been dragging wagons and artillery, and men would have been halting as there was halts in the line, and it would have took a lot longer than it is going to take us today. We're here again at Francis Bream's Black Horse Tavern on the Fairfield Road. The countermarch then headed up Black Horse Tavern Road, or what today is Black Horse Tavern Road. And as we drive, there's not going to be a whole lot to say about the actual march. It's just men marching, but we will pass by some of the sites and farms that these men did. The first one is here on the right, an old cemetery that sits here on the right just behind Bream's Tavern. It's a Bream's Tavern cemetery. These men would have passed right by this cemetery on their march on July 2nd of 1863. And I guess for entertainment purposes, you can at least enjoy the beautiful views of this road. This road, though paved today, the road follows the original roadbed, and it is a road that was here in 1863, just a dirt road. And a lot of the houses that are along the side of the road today were here during the countermarch, this being another one of them here. Of course, Marsh Creek flows along the left side of the road here, and of course over here to the west would be Willoughby Run. Now, as these men were marching, you can only imagine some of the things that were going through their mind. On this time period, July 2nd of 1863, you have to remember, this was Confederate territory. A.P. Hill's division on the first day had taken this ground as they moved and pushed the Union Army back, the 1st and 11th Corps, through the town of Gettysburg. So this was definitely Confederate occupied area. We're going to pick up on our next part. This has been our next part on Longstreet's Countermarch on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Some of the things that must have been going through their mind, of course, was on the morning of July 2nd, as Lee had issued his original plan, the Union Army is now backed up, starting on Cemetery Hill going down toward the Round Top. So there's several miles in this direction over here. They must have wondered why, as we pass another era home, why they were being marched in the opposite direction in which the battle seemed to be about to take place. Now, I'm sure some of them, maybe higher ranking officers, majors, colonels, captains, and so on, may have got some word that they were getting the army into position. But even that, getting your army into position by marching on a countermarch, must have been quite confusing for some of these troops. And again, we're going to slow up as we pass another historic church over here. This is the Upper Marsh Creek Independent Brethren Church. And as we come to this next intersection, we're going to make a right if you guys decide that you want to come out here and drive this route yourself. This is the intersection of Knoxland Road, right here at the Marsh Creek Bridge. Knoxland Road and Black Horse Tavern Road. And if you come here, you'll make a right here onto Knoxland Road. Now remember, Knoxland Road, if you follow in this direction, all the way out to US Route 30, was the site of the first shot of the Battle of Gettysburg at the Ephraim Whistler Blacksmithy. And there's another historic farm. This particular farm here in the fields to the left, during the countermarch of July 2nd, 1863, where you see a lot of these boulders, this was for a period of time Longstreet's men rested in the fields before continuing their countermarch. And remember, they were just spotted at the top of Bream's Hill, which would later be called Troublesome Hill. They had to find a different route and march around the army to another area, hopefully on lower ground, where even from Little Round Top they could not be spotted. We're making a right here onto Old Mill Road, and we're going to continue the march here in our next part. This has been Longstreet's Countermarch on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook.